This video is in response to the video put out by God is Imaginary video, giivideo, regarding 10 questions that every Christian needs to be able to answer. So I'm going to address my comments to the maker of the video, or the narrator of the video, and I'm going to take on each of those questions in this one video, one at a time. First, I have a couple of points I want to make. You have an opening with an appeal to logic and rational thinking and reasoning, and buttering your viewer up as to how educated they are and intelligent they are, and you're just seeking to stake out the intellectual high ground by doing that, and establish the notion that it is only people who are ignorant and so forth who would accept Christian beliefs, and that is certainly not the case. And there are a great many people, scientists among them, who have gone on record establishing themselves as believers and Christians, and not to mention those who are actually active in Christianity, but I'm talking about in the secular world, amongst the people that you call scientists, that you give a blanket endorsement to all of their opinions. Now, you begin also stating that 3 out of 4 doctors believe in miracles, and that's 75%. And I want to point out that according to what you just said, 75% of the men of science, the educated, the most educated among us, who have direct physical experience with circumstances, have gone on record saying that they believe that things are happening regularly that can only be attributed to God. So that seems a strange way to try to make your point, but you put enough spin on it that the person who is not rational and thinking is not going to make that conclusion, but that's exactly what you said. So let's start off with your questions. Question 1, why won't God heal amputees? And I believe God avoids miracles that provide blatant and undeniable proof, because that blatant undeniable proof removes the need for faith. And that's over and over stated in the Bible as a primary ingredient amongst the things that God is wanting from us. So it doesn't mean that there aren't some pretty blatant miracles out there. I know of one person that I've met personally, a lady named Marilyn Ford. Marilyn Ford had her retinas destroyed, and she had no vision, and yet she was healed after years, not one time, not 2 times, but I'm talking about over years of prayer by Marilyn and her husband. One day, all of a sudden, she could see, and she went to the doctors, and the doctors found that her retinas were still destroyed, and they had no idea how she was able to see, but she does. She sees well enough to drive a little electric scooter at speeds that are really not a very good idea, even for a fully sighted person, but she sees well enough to drive too fast. So also, why do you presume to put thoughts in my head and say things that according to your observation are a certain way, and then that makes me uncomfortable? No, it doesn't. You know, I have faith that God's plan is superior to ours, regardless of how bad things look from our point of view, whether those are circumstances that come into the news or my life or whatever it is. It doesn't mean just because we would say this is a tragedy, this is bad, etc., that ultimately and in the long run that it really is bad. So that's not a fair shot. You also don't have the warrant to presume that because you think something is good or bad or whatever, that should dictate what God should do about it. God's not a bellhop. He's not here to answer to our claims on Him blatantly just say, oh yeah, God, I need you to take care of that. And even though he says we should ask about things that are of interest and concern to us, it doesn't give us warrant to think that anything we want is going to happen, even if it appears to us and everybody else that that's the best thing, and we really think God ought to consider our opinion in things he does and does not do. Question 2. Why are there so many starving people in our world? And you say that these people are praying to God and they're not being answered. How do you know these people are actually praying to God? Did they say they were? Are you in possession of a survey amongst these people that said that A, they are Christians, and B, that they are faithfully praying and seeking an answer? And for that matter, who's to say how soon that answer should come? Is that up to you? Are you really the one in position to say what's best? I hate to see people starving. I hate to see suffering and all of that. But ultimately, it's not our opinion that counts. Now, you're also ignoring the vast amount of assistance that Christian groups all over the world are providing to people like that. So there are folks out there who are directly carrying out these type of compassionate missions and doing so in the name of God. Now, are you not counting that as God doing something about it? Are you only going to accept it if it is clearly food falling from the sky with no possible link to the natural world? What is your criteria there? You continue to act as though God is only doing something if it conforms to your idea of a solution. And it's just not going to be the case in every time, in every situation where you or anyone else can predict what solution God might choose. You ignore the free will that God has given to men, which includes the ability of those in power in these countries to steal the food that has been provided and to feed their armies with it or do other things that were not part of the plan. Just because the food is coming doesn't mean that people who have a will to do the wrong thing can't do something about it. Now, ultimately, God's going to deal with that. He's going to take care of those people. But it doesn't mean it's going to happen right away. It doesn't mean it's instantly available, on demand. There is no warrant for on-demand results from prayer. Ultimately, all that bad stuff is traceable to sin and the suffering of men, suffering that men inflict on their fellow men. So, question 3, why does God demand the death of so many innocent people in the Bible? First off, there are no innocent people. Everyone on the planet has sinned to some degree. And that means there are no innocents, there are no good people. We are all predisposed to do bad things. And it is only when the Spirit of God enables us and helps us that some people do good things. Now, the people that you said God wiped out and you said that they were innocent, let's take a look at that. You're talking about people who were in extreme barbarism, and they were doing things like sacrificing their children to idols. Heat up a metal idol that has hands like this and place their infant babies in those red hot hands so that they can die and be sacrificed to this hunk of metal. You think those people are good folks, they're innocent, and man, we ought to just live and let live. Those guys, there's no reason to be concerned about what they do in the privacy of their own little countries. I don't buy that. You know, these people were preying on the weak and the old among the Israelites. For instance, the Amalekites. They were stalking the camp like lions stalk a herd of antelope, and they pick off the weak ones and the old ones and the sick ones and all like that. That's not the way it should be with people. But that means that these folks are in the category of animals, and being destroyed was a pretty good thing for them, it seems to me. You also ignore the messages that God gave to these people telling them their need to repent, telling them that if they didn't do so, there was going to be some very serious consequences. For instance, God warned Nineveh. He sent Jonah. Jonah went throughout Nineveh against his will, saying, in 40 days this place is going to be destroyed if you guys don't straighten up. And they did. They actually responded to that. And that lasted for a while, but then they relapsed, and ultimately they were destroyed after that relapse occurred. But they were spared for that first time because they did repent. So we're not talking again about innocent people. We're talking about people who have managed to make God angry over a long period of time by doing things that I don't think any of us would say were really good things. Now, if you consider anything goes, or the anything goes sexual mentality that was rampant in these cultures, including things like pedophilia, sex with animals, not to mention adultery and homosexuality, and you can begin to see that God might not want them to be partially wiped out, but to be totally wiped out. If you consider the actual people, the animals, even some of their possessions could have been contaminated with who knows what, sexually transmitted diseases, etc. You can see why God would say, I want these people wiped out in order to protect his chosen people, which were the children of Israel. And he wanted to protect them not just from physical contamination, but from spiritual contamination as well. Let's see. You complain that the rules and the harsh punishments imposed on this people would not have existed without God's direct intervention and provision. You intimate that people were dying all the time because of breaking these rules, as though they might be imposed suddenly today, and when it is very unlikely that many people died back then because of the risk of punishment. It just wasn't worth it to go fooling around with those rules. Just like if you go to Singapore, don't spit on the sidewalk, because they take that stuff pretty seriously. And the fact is that the Israelites flourished under those rules, except when they chose to ignore God and ignore his rules, and then there was punishment following that. Why does the Bible contain so much anti-scientific nonsense? Like what? You may be referring to the creation account in the Bible, being in conflict with the current majority opinion favoring Darwinism. There's an ongoing debate there. And it is not one-sided in favor of science or in favor of the Darwinists. In fact, there are many scientists who have declared that Darwinism, or the Darwinian model for evolution, is over, and they're going to have to come up with something else because that one is no longer valid. Now, here's a question for you. If the universe was not created by God, then it must have come from nothing. Everything that had a beginning also had a cause. Please explain how the universe came to be without a cause. Now, before you ask how God came to be without a cause, God is by definition an uncaused being. He is self-existent. And you see this in the names that he had for himself in the Old Testament. He called himself I Am, which is a really strange name to us, but it points to that one critical characteristic of being self-existent. There can be only one uncaused entity, and that's God. God existed outside of time because he created time with the material universe. So before and after did not exist until God created time. You refer to accounts of supernatural events in the Bible as nonsense. It is wrong to simply dismiss anything supernatural as untrue, but this is the mistake that is made by many alleged scholars throughout the world who favor your side of the debate. If the universe exists, there must have been something supernatural at some point, and the case for God's existence is made by that. So is the case for supernatural events. Further, the Bible does contain scientific information that could not have been known at the time without supernatural input, such as the earth being round and the hydrologic cycle that are described in the Old Testament. Arrogance is what you seem to be about. Your constant companion is arrogance, and you state that anything as you state, anything you don't understand is nonsense. Well, that's arrogance. You imply that you know everything, and you don't. You keep appealing to us to corroborate your assertion that something makes no sense, as though we know everything also. That won't fly. Okay, question 5. Why is God such a huge proponent of slavery in the Bible? He's not. Where do you get that? The Bible records many things as they were, but does not necessarily endorse them. The Bible, for instance, gives outstanding detail about King David's lapse into adultery. That doesn't mean it endorses it. The closest that the Bible comes is in the New Testament to endorsing your slavery idea is where it says for slaves to obey their masters. And that's simply an appeal for people to try to accept the circumstances where God has put them. Also, slavery then was not as horrible as it came to be in recent centuries. Many slaves live better than I live now, except that I have air conditioning. It is saying for us all to be content where God has put us, and not that people should be enslaved. The movements that abolished slavery in England and in the U.S. came from religious people and were rooted in biblical arguments. It is disingenuous and therefore betrays the weakness of your argument to try to make this point. Question 6. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, as I said before, there are no good people. We are all rotten sinners and unfit to be in the presence of God ever since the fall of man. So why do bad things happen to pretty good people? Well, good and bad things happen every day. And sometimes the things we thought were good end up destroying us, like people who win the lottery, who ultimately say they wish they had not won. This has happened many, many times, perhaps the majority of times. Sometimes things we thought were bad end up blessing us, like getting fired from a job. We actually hated that job anyway, and now we found a better one. Sometimes really bad things happen that stay bad, at least from our point of view. One of the roots of this argument is the belief that dying is the worst thing that can happen. Everyone will die, so pretending it is the ultimate bad thing only flies for those who do not believe in an afterlife. So I guess that's you. Dying is not dying. Question 6. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, as I said before, there are no good people. We are all rotten sinners, and therefore we are unfit for the presence of God. So, why do bad things happen to pretty good people? Good and bad things happen every day. Sometimes the things we thought were good end up destroying us, like people who win the lottery, who ultimately say that they wish they had not won. Sometimes things we thought were bad end up blessing us, like getting fired from a job we actually hated anyway, and ultimately we end up getting a job we like better, pays better, and so forth. Sometimes really bad things happen that stay bad. At least this is from our point of view. One of the roots of your argument is the belief that dying is the worst thing that can happen. Everyone will die, so pretending it is the ultimate bad thing only flies for those of you who do not believe in an afterlife. Dying is not the worst thing, but dying unsaved is the worst thing. The time we spend here, regardless of our circumstances, is truly nothing compared to eternity. You will live forever. But there's a question. about whether you will enjoy the part of your life that happens after you die. I know there are many people who have come to know Jesus due to their misfortunes and would not trade a long, blissful life for those misfortunes if they were to remain unbelievers. There are many people who suffer because God is trying to get their attention. Many who suffer as part of His plan to save as many of us as possible, given our free will. Many who are victims of sinful men, and God has promised to have revenge such that on the long side of eternity the sufferers will not have no complaint, and they would agree that God had done the right thing. The other side of that question is, why does so much good happen to so many? Isn't it fair to say that the good, or at least the lack of really bad, outweighs the bad? Given that people are drawn to bad stuff, you'd think that good stuff happening would be much less. God never promised to reward His followers with a soft and carefree life free of pain and suffering. Question 7. Why didn't any of Jesus' miracles leave behind any evidence? Well, they did. The birth of Christianity in a totally Jewish nation separated from the world by their staunch belief system is testimony to His claim of deity backed by miracles, particularly rising from the dead. Keep in mind, this could not have been false, since Jerusalem was full of people who saw Him die and later saw Him alive. And many went on to die martyrs' deaths in support of this claim, because of the miracles surrounding His life and resurrection. This is greater evidence than some natural phenomenon would be, like a giant hole in a rock or something that anyone can see, because that would still be disputed by those who want to deny His deity and want to deny anything supernatural. Question 8. How do you explain that Jesus has never appeared to you? Why should He? Why do you assume that that's something that's supposed to happen or should happen? There's no reason for that. I feel privileged to have had the experience that I cover in my video, Prayer is Not Superstition. I'm sure that if a situation should arise that His appearance would be required from His point of view, not ours, that He would. But your question has no weight and says to me that you can't really think of 10 good questions to ask. Question 9. Why would Jesus want you to eat His body and drink His blood? Same thing. You can't really think of any good questions to ask, so you bring up something silly like this. Obviously, this is a symbol. You're clearly becoming more desperate. Question 10. Why do Christians get divorced at the same rate as non-Christians? Well, we live in a fallen world, and sin is waiting for each of us. Temptations that might lead to divorce exclude no one. Christian or not, sin has consequences that we often must bear. It is not evidence of the absence of God, but is evidence of His absence in many of our lives due to our own choices. Look at the many incredible reconciliations that have occurred. Following the worst circumstances, they still happen. These are evidence of God acting in our lives. These, along with the marriages that last until death, are testament to those who do surrender their lives to Christ, letting Him rule in their relationships and not just show up at church on Sunday. Christians disobey God regularly, and this can result in things like divorce, illness, bankruptcy, loss of life, and all kind of bad things, just as it does for anyone else. It doesn't mean God is not out there. It simply means we all do bad stuff. He's ready to forgive us, and we can take advantage of that. You assert that all scientific evidence supports the conclusion that God is imaginary. What about the science that says nothing can come from nothing and that life can't spontaneously occur from non-life? What about that science? What about the direct observation of doctors, as you stated, who are men of science by definition, 75% of whom say miracles happen. You simply label all the answers to your questions as bizarre rationalizations and magically remove them. This is simply lying. You keep saying we are intelligent and educated and so forth. Then you offer an unsupported assertion. Well, I'm sufficiently educated and intelligent to see that you're simply trying to con your viewers into believing your point of view without offering solid evidence or reason. Here's my unsupported assertion. The anti-God point of view and all your lame reasoning is a smokescreen designed to sway your own conscience to ignore parts of your life you know are in conflict with what God has declared as acceptable behavior. You anticipate that if you do wind up facing divine judgment, you can say you had all these reasons not to accept God's authority during your lifetime. I hate to tell you, but that won't fly. You're an intelligent person. You can see your own deep motivation for getting yourself and others to believe a lie. It would be much better if you accepted that and accepted God's forgiveness before you die.